And we're back. 4. Daniels always felt there was something disorienting about transcontinental travel. It was faintly bewildering to spend several days in the interior of the African rainforest, and then, 24 hours later, to find yourself at a cocktail party in a house on the Maryland shore. He hadn't meant to crash General Ford's party, but he had gone directly there from the airport, still dressed in his wrinkled battle dress, determined to get Ford to issue an alert warning of the new virus. But Ford refused to be unduly alarmed. "Look, Sam, be reasonable. I can't write a memo that says the sky is falling. You said it yourself. The virus was contained in that village." The general sipped his beer, then added, "It was contained, right?" "I said containment was probable," Daniels corrected. "I still think we need an alert." Ford held up his hand like a cop stopping traffic. "Sam, do you remember back in '89? 2 lousy cases of Congo fever in Nairobi, and we had a note in every American kid's lunchbox." Daniels refused to be dissuaded. "I was wrong about that." Ford frowned, then looked over at his guests, just to make sure the party was still going on without him. Then he turned back to Daniels, nodding vigorously. "That's right, Sam. You were wrong in '89. What about Lassa fever in '92? "I was wrong. Wrong again. But you're right about this." Sam shook his head. "No, I could be wrong about this too." Daniels pushed a little harder. "This is a level 4 virus. It doesn't get any worse than this. We have to be ready for it. We have to have an alert." Ford was used to indulging his subordinate, but now he was getting a little annoyed. "You come waltzing into my party, smelling like dirty socks, snatch me away from Senator Rosales, whom I need not remind you is a chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Subcommittee, who is in charge of our budget. Which is in charge of our budget?" "Forget Lassa or Ebola." Sam Daniels' small measure of patience had run out. "This bug kills so fast you could die within—" "Keep your voice down," Ford ordered curtly. Guests were casting curious glances in their direction. As if leading by example, Ford's own voice dropped to a whisper. "That's exactly my point. The very lethality of this virus is working for us. These unfortunate people don't live long enough to pass the virus around. So you're right, it is contained." Someone came up behind General Ford and draped an arm around his shoulders. "Hell of a bash, Billy." He was a tall, silver-haired man, and he was smiling and attempting to be jovial, but the warmth didn't transform his eyes, which were pale and stern. He thrust a hand at Sam Daniels. "I'm afraid we haven't met, Colonel. General McClintock." Sam shook his head. Sam shook his hand. "General." The men appraised each other. It was plain that McClintock had heard of Daniels. Daniels had never heard of McClintock, but he had met plenty of spooks in his time, and he looked like one. "Colonel Daniels was just telling me how refreshing a shower would be just now." Daniels was dismissed. "Good to meet you, sir." McClintock nodded graciously and watched as Sam threaded his way through the crowd and out of the house. "If it's what I think it is," Ford whispered, "he brought it back." "Safely?" "Safely." McClintock looked unperturbed. "And what did you tell him?" "No more than he needs to know," said General Ford. It was going to be a day of frustrations for Sam Daniels. After leaving Ford, he drove directly to Robby's house to reclaim his dogs. "You were late," she insisted. "They're coming with me, just like we agreed." He had arrived just as she was getting ready to leave. A taxi was waiting at the curb, and her luggage was piled by the front door. Robby frowned when she opened the door to him, but the dogs seemed glad to see him. Much as he hated to do it, he gave her a hand, lugging her heavy suitcases out of the house and down to the taxicab. "Come on, Robby. They're my dogs, too." "You never understood the concept of real time," said Robby. "What day is it? Sunday, said Sam. When did you say you'd be back? Friday. Thursday, Sam. Thursday. Sam nodded. That's right, Thursday. I meant Thursday. Thursday, Friday. They're so close together, even I confuse them. She picked up a suitcase and tried to jam it into the trunk of the cab. Christ, she growled. Why didn't I just go to Atlanta when I said I would? Because you're a decent human being, said Sam. He tried to help her with the suitcase. If you put the big pieces in first. Robby wrenched the suitcase away from him. She didn't want any more advice from him. She was sick of that. Through with that. Fuck you, Sam. You were going to be home Thursday. I was going to fly Friday and see my new apartment. I'd go to my new job on Saturday, meet my new staff, buy a new toaster, maybe have Sunday to rest. The last of the luggage was crammed into the trunk. She slammed it closed savagely. Now I'm rushing to make my Sunday flight. I won't get to the apartment until 7. If I'm lucky, I can buy the toaster, but it will be 9 before I have a chance to unpack. No, I can't unpack because I have a 9 o'clock hello, how do you do staff party. She pulled open the door of the back seat. Both dogs were lazing there happily, leaving only the tiniest sliver of room for her. Louis, move over, move over. You're scaring him, said Sam. Louis. The dog moved immediately. Robby looked angrily at Sam, annoyed that he had such control over the dogs. That's because you let them on the couch, she said, climbing into the cab. She tapped the driver on the shoulder. Okay, let's go. Wait, said Sam. How long are you keeping the dogs? They are going with me, Sam, to Atlanta. They're my dogs, too, he said. I'll miss 'em. Robby sighed heavily and shook her head. Do you want the dogs, Sam? Either they go with me or they stay here with you. We are not going to split them up, and we are not going to share them. You decide. Sam couldn't respond. He wanted the dogs, but he didn't want to annoy Robby any more than he had already. Most of all, he didn't want her to go. But she was adamant. She snatched at the door handle and started to open the door. Okay, you take them. Sam shook his head and closed the door gently. No, you keep them. Okay, she said. Let's go. Wait a second. There's something I've got to say. Now I'm forgetting. He searched his mind, trying to think of something, anything to delay her departure. Sam, I can't miss this plane. No, right, I remember now. When you go to the pet store, remember they like those medium-sized bones. Barbecue flavored, said Robby impatiently. I know. But suddenly her anger was gone, and now she really looked at her ex-husband. He seemed exhausted and helpless, and Robby knew him well enough to know that it was more than the custody of the dogs or even her departure that was bothering him. You look tired. It was bad in Zaire, wasn't it? Could have been better, he said with a shrug. What's the mortality? About the same as our relationship, he said bitterly. You be careful, she said softly. I will. Good luck in Atlanta. Sam stood and watched the car drive away, the dogs looking back through the rear window, as if saying goodbye. The dogs were gone. Robby was gone. All that remained in his life was work. Sam Daniels fought jet lag all night and got to the lab the next morning, bright and early. He passed through the various security checkpoints, returning the salutes of the sentries. Sam Daniels approached the last set of metal doors before the BL4 lab entrance and slipped his ID card into an optical reader. Almost instantly, the computer screen set in the wall printed out his name and serial number, and a digitized voice boomed from the wall speaker. How are you today, Colonel Daniels? Bursting with joy, said Daniels sourly. And you? Sam's voice print appeared on the computer screen, and it took only a second for the computer to match his voice against the example stored in the computer's memory. The doors clicked open, and Daniels swept down the corridor, anxious to get to work. He caught up with Casey Schuler in the central corridor leading to the labs. "Robby's gone. She left for Atlanta. Can you believe it? She's joined the CDC. Sam, you always knew she was going. This can't be much of a surprise. She took the dogs." "No kidding. How did that happen?" "She took the dogs and left me the photographs. All the photographs from our marriage." He shook his head. "Can you believe it?" Casey stopped. "Wait, let me get this straight. You didn't want the photos, but you did want the dogs? That it?" "You're missing the point, Casey." "Was there a photo of the dogs?" Casey asked. "'Cause if you'd taken that, all your problems would be solved." "Forget it, Case," said Sam sourly. "I open my heart to you and you make jokes." "I'm not making jokes." "When we got the dogs, we were together. They were ours." "They were cute," said Casey. "Now that we're not together, they're still cute. They're still ours." "Then the dogs are probably a case for the Supreme Court." "Look, I'm just asking you if you think I'm right or wrong." Casey had heard enough. "We're about to look at the most deadly virus that either of us has ever encountered, and I think your mind should be somewhere in the neighborhood." "It is." "No, it isn't." Casey stopped and faced Daniels and spoke carefully, as if laying out a rational, cogent argument. "Look, she's got a new job at CDC. Strike that. She's got your job at CDC. She's starting a new life. She's happy. Strike that. She's happier. She's not coming back. It's nobody's fault. Move on. It's over. And quite frankly, I'm tired of hearing about it." Sam gaped at him as if hearing all this for the first time. "What do you mean it's over?" "Well, I think a state-sanctioned divorce order signed by both parties is strong evidence that something was off." "Did you talk to her?" Sam demanded. "Did she say it was off?" They were in the locker room outside of BL4 now, climbing into their scrubs and snapping the gloves on their hands. "Sam, do you know how I've managed to remain friends with the two of you?" He stripped some tape from the roll and wrapped it around his wrists. "How?" "I don't have conversations like this." "I'm not asking you to take sides," said Sam, although he wouldn't have minded if Casey chose to commiserate with him. "She's not a mean person. I know she didn't take the dogs to be mean. I'm just asking your opinion." He taped his own wrists and then grabbed one of the blue biosafety suits. "I don't have an opinion," said Casey. He pulled a red air hose from the ceiling and fitted the nozzle into a valve in his suit and inflated it, a standard safety procedure. Every piece of clothing had to be tested in this manner, looking for minute cracks and tears that might compromise the security of the suit. "Everybody has an opinion," said Sam, zipping into his own suit. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniels looked blankly at Schuler. "What? What?" "You forgot to test that suit, Sam." Casey fingered the material. "Look, it's torn." Suddenly, both men were sweating. A momentary lapse, a second of forgetfulness, could mean death. It was out of character for an old pro like Sam Daniels to make a mistake like that, and to Casey it was an indication of just how upset he was over the death of his marriage. Casey pulled a length of tape from the roll and pressed it over the rent in the protective suit. "Hey, if you get cooked, who've I got left to dump on?" "Thanks, Case. Takes your breath away." The airlock procedures for the BL4 lab were elaborate and foolproof. Clad in their protective suits, Casey and Daniels got into the first chamber in the lock and plugged their suits into two long red cords which supplied air to their helmets. One side of the lock closed as the other opened. Casey and Daniels stepping into the lab proper, their air hoses, umbilical cords as they were known around the lab, running on complex tracks set in the ceiling. The laboratory was a large, brightly lit room dotted with equipment and workstations. In the center of the room were bulky circular freezers, each secured with a combination lock. It was in these stainless steel vats that thousands of different diseases slept, inert in dry ice. There were no windows in the laboratory, and no source of natural light. The only things on the walls were two large screens hooked up to the two electron microscopes and could be used for video projections. The two men were surprised to discover that they were not the first in to work that morning. There was a third space-suited figure in the lab working under a pressure hood at an electron microscope. Walter Salt emerged from under the hood. "Good morning, Colonel. I took the liberty of bringing in the Motaba samples myself." Daniels was pleased with Salt's display of initiative. "Early riser, Casey." His tone of voice suggested that Schuler might learn something from Salt. "Hey, I was up at 4, took a piss, went back to sleep." "Salt, thaw a sample of the virus, separate it, and get it under the scope." "Done," said Salt. "We'll have the results in a couple of hours." Sam beamed. "Very good, Major Salt." Casey strolled over to a stainless steel cart containing a rack of aluminum vials, picking up the one labeled Motaba No. 7. He tossed it lightly in his hands, playing with it. "Motaba," he said. "Listen to the way it rolls off your tongue. Motaba. Sounds like a perfume, doesn't it?" Salt couldn't help but be alarmed. In spite of the high-tech suits and the elaborate containment procedures, these diseases just weren't things that you played with. He glanced over at Daniels, expecting to see that he was just as horrified, but he wasn't. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the moment. Casey did a little dance and rubbed the vial across his chest seductively, as if it really did contain perfume. "Motaba," he said breathily. "One drop and you feel so different. Your lover will melt in your arms. Here, try a sample." Without warning, he tossed the vial to Salt. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The container spiraled across the room, turning end over end. Salt felt a flash of fear and a moment of hesitation, but instinct won through. His hands went up, and he caught the tube. But it wasn't the Motaba tube. It was a plain old glass tube that Casey had snatched and thrown. Casey nodded approvingly and waved the vial of Motaba at Salt. "Good hands, Salt. Not as quick as mine. Don't mess with this stuff. We're professionals. Gotta be ready for anything. Ain't nothing in here that can't kill you." "Including the air," said Sam. "Now that we've initiated Major Salt, I need an ELISA test and a PCR primer pair." Casey was all business now, the hijinks of a few moments before forgotten. "We need a blood test for this yesterday." "I'm already on it, sir," said Salt crisply. "Yes, sir." Energized and happy, Salt returned to his microscope. Daniels was far from finished dispensing orders. "Casey, live animal studies. I want tropism, antiviral responses, kill rates. Give me all possible vectors. Is this thing carried by an insect, a rodent, or what? I'll freeze him, drown him, shake him, and bake him." "Case, there's a good chance at seeing a virus no one has ever seen before." Casey Schuler grinned. "That's why we do what we do in blue, Sam." Salt looked up from his microscope. "Sirs, does that make me black and blue?" "Sorry, sirs." "Salt, where's my mugshot?" "Yes, sir." Salt returned to the computer console attached to the electron microscope. "Yes, sir, got it right here. We've compressed 8 hours into 30 seconds and generated an enhanced computer image." He dimmed the lights in the room and then projected an image from the microscope onto one of the wall screens. The culture of live human cells appeared from the haze of images, the circular discs bumping along the bloodstream like boats. Salt sharpened the focus slightly. "Normal, healthy liver cells," he said. "Okay, here comes trouble." An infected cell appeared in the bloodstream. It is different from all the others on the screen. This one was as black as a rotten tooth, and weird snake-like forms wriggled within the cell, making the organism look as if it were trembling on the screen. "Those snakes are the virus," Salt explained. "In the course of an hour, a single virus has invaded the cell here, multiplied, and killed it. 2 hours, and it's invaded nearby cells, and they continue to multiply. The wriggling of the virus intensified, as if it were boiling within the cell until the membrane burst. The snakes streamed out of one host and into the bloodstream, slashing about, scores of them, hundreds, swarming onto the surfaces of the healthy cells with terrifying speed and rapacity. It was as if these things were actually hungry and needed to devour the healthy living cells around them. "Jesus Christ," said Casey. "Replicates, kills, reinvades this fast? These numbers can't be right. Ebola takes 3 days." "The numbers are correct, sir," said Salt. He raced forward to the conclusion of the example. The screen was almost black with the virus. "That's all she wrote for this culture. Every cell is dead. This murkiness? That's the virus. One has turned into millions." He increased the magnification. "The membrane of a single cell. The virus has replicated and turned the cell to mud. If one of them is granddad, then some of them are his grandkids, looking to become granddaddies themselves. This family don't believe in weddings." "But they sure as hell love large receptions," said Casey. Salt flicked a switch on the console, and the magnification on the screen changed. "Closer, closer, closer. Here we go." The images loomed larger and larger, the computer enhancement kicking into high gear. The fuzzy, snaking forms vanished. "Gentlemen," said Salt, "meet Mr. Motaba." The 3 scientists stared at the image, the light reflected on their face shields, making it look as if the virus were crawling across their skin, into their noses and eyes. "I hate this bug," said Casey softly. As Daniels stepped closer to the screen for a better look, Salt bumped the images up to the highest level of magnification. The virus seemed to loom over them like an evil spirit. Daniels looked with awe and fear, but also with determination, a conviction that he would take on this disease and destroy it. "It's the perfect beast," said Sam. "It doesn't want to be here. We're the first to see it, and now it's our job to destroy it." At that moment, however, he did not look equal to the task, appearing puny compared to his foe. The virus looked cold, alien, almost mechanical looking, and utterly deadly. 5. The moon had risen over the USAMRID complex. The parking lot was almost empty, and even enthusiastic, driven researchers like Salt and Schuler had thrown in the towel and gone home hours before. Sam Daniels was battling fatigue himself, and realizing that the longer he stayed, the smaller the returns would be. The time had come. He had to call it quits for the day and face the empty house. But General Ford was still there. He watched a bank of security monitors, tracking Daniel's progress through the building, from the BL-4 lab to the locker room, then down the long corridor to the main exit. There were 2 sentries on duty there, and they snapped to attention as he passed, Daniels giving them a weary salute. Ford waited until he saw that Daniels had left the building, then stood and made his way toward the lab. A corporal stationed at one of the corridor checkpoints was surprised to see the big man himself, but it wasn't up to a non-com to ask a general why he was bothering to work late. The general's salute was a little more spit and polish than Daniel's had been. "As you were, Corporal," the general said as he swept by. He looked a lot calmer and more confident than he actually felt, but he betrayed not a trace of nervousness. Ford entered the locker room and slipped into his own suit of green surgical scrubs, and then his blue biosafety suit. He walked through the airlock, tethering his umbilical cord to the air supply, then stepped into the lab itself, moving quickly across the big room. Suddenly his air tube snagged on the sharp corner of a lab bench, stopping him in his tracks, and threatening to pull from the suit. He stopped, frightened, quickly checking his hose. It was stretched and dented, but not broken, and it had held in its mooring in his suit. But it had been close. In this atmosphere, alone, any mistake could lead to sudden and immediate contamination. Ford allowed himself to breathe again, relieved. "The world is round, you guys," he muttered. "Didn't anybody happen to mention that?" He grabbed a metal file from one of the toolboards and rasped down the corner of the bench until it was perfectly smooth and rounded. The general was in a hurry, but there was always time for safety precautions in the BL-4 lab. Once he had finished with the corner, he walked across the lab to one of the circular freezers and punched a 7-digit entry code into the security keypad. The lock snapped open instantly, and as he lifted the heavy lid, heavy condensation vapor rose in a cloud. Inside the freezer, lying in metal racks, were 12 aluminum tubes, each one labeled Motaba. Ford carefully removed one of them and resealed the chest. Ford was not alone. Coming through the airlock were 2 men, their silver biosafety suits indicating that they were strangers to this facility. They did not say a word as they crossed the room, one of them taking the Motaba tube from Ford, the other opening a clear plexiglass box and removing an identical vial within. Ford nodded to the 2 men, as if giving them permission to proceed, and then left the lab, his part in the operation completed. As he passed through the airlock, though, he looked over his shoulder. The technicians were settled at one of the electron microscopes, silently going about their business. Only the gray glow of a blank video screen lit his office. The rest of the orderly Spartan room was in darkness. With a heavy sigh, Ford sank into the high-backed leather chair behind his desk. He rubbed his eyes and temples, as if trying to massage away the headache that was beginning to pound through his brain. He did not jump when his cigarette lighter flared in the corner of the room, the tiny eruption of flame illuminating the face for only a split second. That kind of sudden, dramatic gesture was McClintock all over, and Ford had grown used to that sort of thing, dating back to the days when McClintock had been the leader, and Ford had been nothing more than his aide. "You look tired, Billy." Major General Donald McClintock was wreathed in smoke, and his features were indistinct, but Ford could imagine the lean, gaunt face, the iron-gray hair, the slightly condescending cast to his mouth. "Colonel Daniels is not going to like our going behind his back like this." "Then we'll kill him." McClintock laughed dryly. "Come on, lighten up, Billy. We have no alternative. You're so goddamn sentimental. That's the trouble with this whole country. Sentimentality." Ford looked at him sharply. To McClintock, life was a game to be played and won, no matter the human cost. Before he could say anything, though, Ford's telephone beeped softly. He picked up the handset, listened for a moment, then replaced it. "They're ready." "Good," said McClintock. A haze of static clouded the video screen. Then an image appeared on the left-hand side of the monitor. It was an attenuated viral, a DNA double helix, labeled Motaba Valley, 1967. A moment passed, and then a second blurry image appeared on the right-hand side of the screen. Another double helix, this one marked Motaba, Virus, Daniels, 1995. Even a layman could see that the 2 specimens were identical. A disease that had vanished almost 30 years earlier had come back to life. Even after all this time, Ford had never forgotten that terrible day. The grotesque tangle of that meaningless war, the mercenary camp, the doctor, the dead and dying, the terrified soldiers, the death and fire that McClintock had showered on them. "Oh, God, it's our old friend," said Ford. "Back for a hey hello." "Son of a gun," said McClintock. "Daniels didn't find the host, did he?" "No." McClintock turned from the video screen and looked at Ford, his eyes pale, icy, emotionless. "Lock it up, Billy. Shelve it. You know about this. I know about this. Nobody else. Get your friend Daniels off the case. I don't want that nosy little bastard messing up 30 years of national security work. You understand that?" Sam Daniels found the orders on his desk when he came in the next morning. They were written in the cramped, lifeless language of Army bureaucratese, but Sam caught the meaning instantly. It was nothing more than a single paragraph over General Ford's signature. Daniels and his team were being pulled off research on the Motaba virus. He stared at it for a moment, rereading it twice, then stalked down the hall. Daniels did not respect Army protocol at the best of times, and this was far from the best of times. He pushed into Ford's office and slammed the door behind him. Ford was standing by his desk going over some papers with his secretary, Sergeant Dixon. "What the hell is going on?" demanded Daniels. Ford, as unflappable as always, looked at Daniels over his glasses. "Sergeant," he said softly, "would you be good enough to get us some coffee?" "Sir," said Dixon. He exited as discreetly as a butler. "Why are we being pulled off Motaba?" "Calm down," said Ford sharply. "And don't you ever talk to me like that again in front of the troops. You know better than that." Daniels did his best to control himself, but it took all his strength. "Yes, sir." Ford sighed and dropped his papers on his desk. "Sit down, Sam. I thought we agreed Motaba was contained." "It's contained now," Daniels replied. "It's gonna pop up later. We don't have a blood test yet. We don't know how it's transmitted. We don't know diddly squat." "Sam," said Ford wearily, "there's a fresh outbreak of the hantavirus in New Mexico. The CDC needs some help. I'm sending you." "Send Peterson's team," said Sam curtly. Ford's anger flashed. "Don't tell me who to send on assignment. I told Senator Rosales I'd send my best man. That's you. Now get out of here." Daniels looked at the ceiling, rolling his eyes. "We've got baseline information on Hanta. What are you sending me out there to do? Trap rats? Billy, we've got the bug growing. Most proteins isolated. We'll have an antibody test in a week." "Sam," said Ford, "I have given you your orders." "For God's sake, Billy, listen. Casey has put the bug in rodents and rhesus. If all goes well, we'll know its genetic sequence in a month. If you leave us alone, we'll map this guy down to the last gene. It'll make you famous." Daniel's tenacity was beginning to bother Ford. "Sam, the odds of Motaba causing us any more trouble are 1,000,000 to 1, and you know it." "No, I don't know that." "Well, you should. And you would if you didn't harbor this morbid desire to face the end of the world. Now, please. This is the biggest thing we've ever seen." "You're killing me," said Ford. "It's a fresh, brand new virus," said Sam Daniels desperately, a last-ditch effort to change Ford's mind. But the general was unmoved. "You're still killing me. Now get out of here." A curious air of mourning hung over the lab. Salt, Daniels, and Casey looked into the empty freezer as if it were a tomb. "Every last sample of Motaba is gone," said Daniels. "Where the hell did they put it all?" "General Ford ordered me to move all tubes to the sealed vault in A-Wing," said Salt. "Only he has access there. He said we weren't going to need him for several months." "I can't believe that they're really doing this," said Daniels. He turned to Casey. "Where are the primary specimens?" "None," said Casey. "There's nothing in the incubator? We can grow this back in no time. I'll tell them we're growing Hanta out of rat shit." Sam Daniels looked to Casey, expecting support. Schuler positively enjoyed subverting authority. But he didn't look pleased now. In fact, he was hanging his head. "Case?" "I'm shocked," said Casey. What? I'm shocked. Casey looked up and grinned. And ashamed of myself. Sam watched, puzzled, as Casey crossed the room and withdrew a tube from a freezer. I am ashamed of myself because I carelessly misplaced one of the Motaba samples yesterday and put it in here. I know that if I give this to you, it will be in good hands, and that you will make sure my mistake is corrected, sir. The two men shared a conspiratorial smile. Sam shook his head. Always, 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 Casey, I am forced to deal with your carelessness. Schuler shrugged. You know me. Aboard the freighter Tay-Cuck, Seattle. At sea, August 29, 1995. The Korean breakbulk freighter was plowing through heavy seas, 90 miles out, making for the port, Oakland, California. It was carrying a varied cargo, electronics and cheap clothing from South Korea, engine parts from Japan, and a small menagerie of exotic animals that were consigned by an animal broker in Singapore. Some of the animals were meant for American zoos and wild animal parks, but most, including a black and white colobus monkey, were intended for labs and biological testing facilities all over the country. The animals were under the care of the lowest-ranking seaman on the ship, a 21-year-old seaman second class named Chan Ho Lee. It was his first trip, and he felt seasick and lonely, tired of the bullying and teasing of the more senior crew members. They thought they had been punishing him when they gave him the dirty and unpleasant job of taking care of the animals. But in actual fact, the time he spent in the hold was the best part of his long working day. The animals were the only living creatures on board who were worse off than he was, and they helped to pass the time and ease the pain of the passage. He was particularly fond of the little black and white monkey. He made sure that he saved some small part of his meals to bring as a treat for her, some rice balls, perhaps, or a piece of fruit, and she seemed to appreciate it. Yet Seaman Chan could tell that she was not happy. Of course, he did not know that this was only the latest leg in a terrifying journey that had taken her from her home. After she had been captured, the monkey had been carried down to Kinshasa and loaded onto a plane, which took her to the Mozambique port of Maputo. There she had been packed into her tiny cage to begin a long sea voyage across the Indian Ocean to Jakarta and from there on to Singapore. She had been terrified for every minute of every day. Chan pushed a piece of banana through the bars of the cage, and the monkey snatched it, then retreated to the far corner, studying the young man with plaintive eyes. He tried to reach far enough in to stroke her dirty fur, but he couldn't reach. "What's the matter, girl?" he said softly. "Don't worry. This trip is almost over. You'll feel better soon." Chan sighed. The monkey would be fine. He, on the other hand, had to endure the long return trip. BL-4 Lab, Frederick, Maryland, August 29, 1995. Casey Schuler took charge of the meager supply of Motaba and began to run tests. It didn't take him long to establish some basic facts about Motaba, none of them good. Late in the day, he and Salt led Daniels into the animal testing section of the BL-4 lab, an underground warren lined with cages. Diseases were let loose in that chamber, so biosafety suits and airlocks were essential here, too. Casey wasn't grinning anymore. "This bug definitely ate its Wheaties," he said. Daniels stopped short. A pair of white rats lay dead in one cage. He looked around the room. There were dead animals in every test cage. Guinea pigs, mice, hamsters, birds, rabbits. "Tell me what we know," said Daniels. "It spreads through moisture," Salt explained. "That's body fluids or direct physical contact. That rules out an insect host and insect transmission," said Schuler. "No test species survived, and I've treated them with all known antivirals. I guess that's the good news. We're not looking for ticks, fleas, flies, mosquitoes, that sort of thing." Daniels and Salt walked the length of the cages, looking at the dead animals. It was apparent through the fur and feathers that these creatures had died horrible deaths. "What about airborne? Dust, wind?" Casey shook his head. "Negative. It dries out. Dr. Owabi was right." "Thank God for that," whispered Salt. "Well, that's really the end of the good news. Once this guy hits tissue, the lethality is like nothing we've ever seen. Not one of the test species has survived, even when I've treated them with all known antivirals." Daniels was incredulous. "Bullshit! You used intravenous icy clover?" This powerful drug was the heaviest piece of hardware in the virus-fighting artillery, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, I apologize. "No effect," said Casey. "Ribovirin? Hey, you can bathe this guy in it," Casey scoffed. "He'll still bench press the Sunday Times." There was a note of admiration in Casey's voice. Motaba was a killer, but it was a challenger worthy of the contest. "Jesus." "And it's smaller than we thought, Colonel," said Salt. "We were worried that we didn't have enough of the stuff. Millions of these can fit into a single drop of human blood." "Enough to wipe out half the U.S. population," said Casey. "Great," said Sam with a shrug. "This thing kills everything and we can't treat it." "There's our challenge." Schuler had the tiniest smile on his face. Daniels stepped closer to the rabbit cage and looked at the lifeless, blood-spattered corpses. They were twisted and contorted, their eyes terrified and opened wide as if they had seen their approaching death. In all his life, Daniels had never encountered such a fearful opponent, and it frightened him more than he could say. Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, Georgia, August 29, 1995. Dr. Roberta Keogh was settling into her new life, and it was a little more difficult than she had anticipated. There was a long-standing rivalry between the Center for Disease Control and the U.S. Army Infectious Diseases Division, and there were those on the CDC staff who suspected that her sudden conversion to the cause was less than sincere. She did her best to reassure her new colleagues that, despite her background, she was on the team wholeheartedly. Nevertheless, she resented criticisms of her former colleagues, her husband included. She knew firsthand that the men and women at USAMRIID were extremely dedicated and highly skilled. Solving the quandary was not made any easier by Sam Daniels. The first call she took that morning was from her ex-husband, and she knew at once that something was up. Sam didn't open with any pleasantries, didn't ask about her new life, didn't even inquire about the welfare of the dogs. "Robby," he said, his voice low and intense, "this call is unauthorized." Robby blinked. "What are you saying? Are you telling me that this is outside of channels?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." "Are you out of your mind? You'll get drummed out of the service for sure." The Pentagon did not forgive members of the armed forces who bypassed official procedures and went to the civilian world. "Rob, I need your help." "Help with what?" "Motaba. You know, the thing I went to Zaire for. This is the big one, Robby. This thing is death itself. If it gets into circulation in this country, then we are well and truly cooked, and I mean that literally." "What are you saying, Sam? If it is as bad as you say, then Ford and the rest of the brass will be behind you every step of the way. There's no need to come to us." "That's the weird thing, Robby. Ford has dropped the ball. He's put a lock on Motaba. He won't even sanction research. The day before yesterday, we could write our own ticket. As of this morning, we're supposed to be working on Hanta in New Mexico." "People are dying of Hanta, Sam." "Right. Hanta is out of the bottle. Motaba isn't yet. The deaths have been confined to a small part of Africa. This one is bad, Robby. It has all the hallmarks of a Class 4 son of a bitch. Incredible fevers, petechial lesions. If it gets loose..." She could hear him sigh and could imagine the intense look on his face. "We have to be on the lookout for it. I need the CDC to put out a bulletin. Now." There was a long silence. "Are you listening to me?" Sam asked. Yes, said Robby. I'm listening. Are you writing this down? I wrote it down. So you'll send out the alert? Robby shook her head. No, she said curtly. I'm not going to base one of my first official decisions on a hunch when the Army won't even back you. Hunch? Robby, I'm faxing you the whole epidemic. I've got a lab full of dead animals. No response to intravenous acyclovir to ribavirin. They're all dead. There was real desperation in his voice. But Robby refused to be swayed. Of course they're dead, she snapped. You stuck 'em all with the same needle. Where's the evidence that it's coming here? There's no evidence that it won't, said Sam. I'm telling you, I've got a bad feeling. Okay, Sam, said Robby. Your feeling is in my notes. Daniels was in no mood for further argument. There's nothing complicated about this. It's very simple. This thing kills everything in its path. Just tell them to put out the alert. Do it. This is beginning to sound familiar, said Robby archly. Is that an order, Colonel Daniels? She could hear him sigh in exasperation. I can't believe you're turning a deadly virus into a family matter. It's not personal, Sam. But it was personal. At least it was to Sam Daniels. Robby, why don't you take one fucking chance for once in your life? I did, she snapped back. I married you. Then she hung up on him. Biotest Animal Holding Facility, San Jose, California, August 30, 1995. The monkey's journey was far from over. The Tay-Cuck Seattle was offloaded in San Francisco, but the monkey's destination was San Jose, 44 miles to the south at the head of San Francisco Bay. Her cage was pulled out of the hold, swung into blinding daylight, then locked in the pitch black of a tractor trailer for the long, noisy ride. When the rear doors of the truck finally opened, the cage was taken off the truck and put on a forklift and trundled into a vast warehouse. Inside were cages stacked 3 high. Each one contained a monkey, but the new arrival was the only colobus, the rest being brown rhesus monkeys. The close, fetid air of the warehouse was filled with the screams and shrieks of terrified animals. The forklift operator found the space allotted for the colobus and stacked the cage. He poked his fingers through the cage, touching the animal. Hey, babe, I'm Jimbo. He was a tall, rather scrawny guy with scraggly black hair that fell to his shoulders. When he smiled, he showed a mouthful of uneven teeth. Jimbo Scott rattled the cage, pounding out a quick percussion beat. Just then the beeper clipped to his belt sounded. He turned it off and looked at the return number glowing red in the LED display. It was a number Jimbo was always happy to see because it meant a little extra money. Jimbo looked at the monkey and winked as the monkey wailed and whimpered. It's okay, girl. We're all creatures of God here, right? And you'll be out of this place quick smart, I promise. He swung up into the seat of the forklift again. Catch you later. In Jimbo Scott's mind, the job at the biotest warehouse was temporary, extremely temporary, because Jimbo had big plans. He was a drummer in a rock and roll band, and Jimbo thought it was just a matter of time before the big break came. Until opportunity in the form of megastardom came calling, however, Jimbo was always on the lookout to make a little spare cash. The job with Biotest paid poorly, and Jimbo's needs were great. He augmented his income any way he could. Jimbo had an arrangement with a pet shop in Cedar Creek, the proprietor of which had a small sideline in exotic animals. Jimbo stole animals from Biotest to order, and it just so happened that an order for a female colobus monkey had just come in. He left work at 5 that afternoon, but he was back by 6, knowing that the warehouse would be deserted by then. The only human being on the site would be the night watchman, a young man named Neil who, Jimbo knew from experience, was never averse to making a little easy money. Neil smiled conspiratorially when Jimbo drove his battered Volvo up to the gate. He could see that there was a cage covered by a blanket in the back seat. "So your ship came in again, eh, Jimbo?" Jimbo already had two $20 bills ready. He handed them to Neil and winked. "That's our ship, Neil. Our ship, yeah?" "I hear ya. Ship just come in from Africa, a land of great beauty and untold riches." Neil stuffed the bills into his trouser pockets. "Absolutely untold." "Gonna transact a little business," said Jimbo. "Then I'm out of here." "Where are you going?" "Vacation. Going to Boston to see my girl." Neil punched a button in the guardhouse control panel and the gate swung open. "Have a good trip. See you on the way out." The whole thing was so simple. All Jimbo had to do was let himself into the warehouse, grab the monkey, and put her in the cage he had brought as an afterthought. Sorry, there's a comma there. And put him in the cage he had brought. As an afterthought, he tossed in a plastic baby bottle full of water and half a banana. In my defense, that comma probably should have been a period. Oh well. "There you go. Don't say I never give you nothing." The monkey bared her teeth and lashed out with her claws. Jimbo hardly flinched. He was used to working with animals, so the creature's spits and scratches hardly slowed him down. The most complicated part of the theft was logging on to the warehouse computer and removing the colobus from the inventory, and that only took a minute or two. Jimbo waved to Neil as he drove off the lot and was soon heading north on Route 680, making good time for Cedar Creek, the radio blasting. The colobus was not happy. She chattered and jumped nervously in her cage, the blaring music and the speed at which they were traveling making her agitated and jittery. Jimbo hardly noticed. He was by nature a happy-go-lucky young man, not given to introspection or soul-searching. His theft didn't bother him in the slightest. All he was interested in doing was getting his money and then flying off to Boston. Life, generally, was good. Jimbo pounded the wheel and beat with the music, watching the monkey in the rear-view mirror. He half-turned in the driver's seat and winked at the animal. "What's the matter, baby? Music is supposed to soothe the savage beast." The monkey sucked a mouthful of water from the bottle and spat at Jimbo. Her aim was perfect, hitting him square in the face, drenching him with water and saliva. "Little shit!" Jimbo wiped his face, surprised and angry that the monkey had nailed him so unerringly. "Lucky for you I don't have a Michael Bolton tape for punishment." The rest of the trip was uneventful. By the time he arrived at his destination, Jimbo had forgotten all about his little tiff with the monkey. Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, Georgia. August 30, 1995. Robby Keogh could not stop thinking about the conversation with her ex-husband. He was headstrong, he was infuriating, but he was also smart, and there was no doubt in her mind that Sam had sounded worried. But it wasn't the first time he had sounded an alarm bell unnecessarily. It was, however, the first time he had flouted USAMRID convention and gone outside of the department channels. She knew Sam was unpredictable, a loose cannon, but not even he would take a step so serious without good reason. Robby snatched up some papers lying on her desk and attempted to do some work, but she couldn't concentrate, her eyes refusing to focus on the words printed on the page in front of her. She stared angrily at the phone, half expecting it to ring, Sam calling again with another barrage of extremely persuasive arguments. Then she said, aloud, "The hell with it." She gathered up the notes she had taken during her brief conversation with Sam and marched down the hall to the office of the director. She had met Dr. Drew Reynolds twice, once when she had been interviewed for the job, and once again when he gave her the traditional "welcome aboard" speech. Beyond that, she found this man remote and austere, an intimidating presence in his trademark seersucker jacket and waspy bow tie. She knocked on his door and peered around the frame, hoping that he wasn't in a meeting. "Excuse me, Dr. Reynolds?" Reynolds, typing furiously at his computer console, glanced at her and held up one hand while typing with the other. "One moment," he said, and went on typing for a full minute before stopping, examining his words on the screen, and turning to his newest recruit. "What can I do for you, Dr. Keogh?" Dr. Daniels up at Dr. Daniels up at USAMRID wants us to send out a special bulletin warning all physicians to watch out for symptoms of a virus from Zaire called Motaba. He thinks it's serious enough that it can't wait for our regular monthly report. Her words came out in a rush, as if she said it fast enough he wouldn't focus on their exact meaning. Reynolds regarded her over the tops of his half-framed Reynolds regarded her over the tops of his half-framed glasses, looking at her as if he had suddenly been confronted with the realization that he had somehow hired a half-wit. "A special report." "That's right. The warning will be included in our weekly report, Dr. Keogh," Reynolds said curtly. Robby felt she had to press the point. "That doesn't go out until next Wednesday. Colonel Daniels believes this is serious enough to send out an immediate alert, and I think he has a point." Dr. Reynolds whipped his glasses off his nose and twirled them. He was smiling, and there was something about that gesture that unnerved her. "Do you know what it costs to send out a special alert to 400,000 health officials?" "Is that my job?" "No," said Reynolds. "It's my job." "In '89 he predicted Hanta and it hit," said Robby. "I suppose I understand your allegiance to your ex-husband, but we hired you, not him. And you know as well as I do that the chances of this virus showing up in the U.S. are virtually nil. Am I right?" The two locked eyes for a moment. "That's your call, Dr. Reynolds." Reynolds nodded. "I know. The warning will be included in our weekly report." Keogh was dismissed. Her cheeks burning, she turned and walked out of the office. She did not see the sour look that Reynolds shot after her, which was just as well because Robby was feeling as low as she had in months. She managed to keep her composure all the way to the elevator. Once inside, though, she slumped against the wall, close to tears. Life was not working out quite the way she had hoped, and she still felt the pull of her broken marriage. People were waiting for the elevator on the landing of her floor, so Robby was forced to pull herself together, reassuming through considerable effort a confident and professional manner. Like Sam Daniels, she knew only one way out of the blues: more work.